what I think the responsibility of a journalist or a writer is. It really has to come from like principles and your passion and not from the incentivization that comes from crowdfunding.
Well, speaking of one's role as a writer or journalist or a media figure, pundit, what have you, that's a really good segue to, I know the last thing I want to talk to you about, a conversation I know you've been interested in, and which I've been very preoccupied with myself. I've now watched it 3 times, which is this interview between Ta-Nehisi Coates and Ezra Klein, where they speak at length, each of them sort of defining what they think, what their role is as journalists, and also what they think the line is. Another way to say that is litmus tests in terms of, what do you have a personal red line? Do you have a personal red line with respect to who you choose to sort of engage with politically and take seriously and platform? Do you have a red line in terms of what you're willing to sacrifice for political expediency in terms of your own views? Are there populations that you're willing to sacrifice in order to win? Ezra Klein makes the case that, various communities are worse off under Trump. And so if the Democratic Party were to distance themselves from various interests, let's say being pro-choice, that would ultimately be better for women down the line. Ta-Nehisi Coates takes a sort of a different position, saying that his role is not to advocate for what necessarily is politically expedient, but what he thinks the line should be and what his own values reflect, and to try to persuade people not just to whatever position will help Democratic Party to win, but what the right position is, persuading, the idea being if you persuade enough people to actually agree with you substantively, then they will also support the policies that you support, and you will also therefore be likely to win. So this was sort of teed up in this, hour-long back and forth between them that got a lot of traction because many people perceived it, I perceived it, as sort of exposing Ezra Klein's lack of sort of, not just sort of moral core or ideological core is perhaps a better way to say it, but his sort of unwillingness to engage seriously with Ta-Nehisi Coates, saying that a politics without some kind of ideological core is one that might fail because it fails to inspire and it fails to get people to have confidence in you and be willing to join your tent in the first place or stay in your tent in the first place. So I wonder what your take of this conversation was, which of course I should have said was a follow-up to Ezra Klein having done this piece that was a canonizing, a kind of hagiography of okay, let me not characterize it, a eulogy of Charlie Kirk, and then Ta-Nehisi Coates having written a response piece in, I think, The Nation.
Yeah, I mean, this is the moral dimension of the Charlie Kirk debate, but it's also it became a larger debate about where the Democratic Party should go, which in itself is revealing, along with the host of the debate, the New York Times, which is like the Democrat Times. And Ezra Klein says at one point in this debate, Charlie Kirk was just basically starting out with this lemonade stand. He just had this little table at college campuses, and he pulled himself up from his bootstraps like Horatio Algiers and just lived the American dream with this big empire. Like, no, it wasn't Horatio Algiers. It was Elmer Gantry. And he was backed by industry. He was backed by the billionaire donor class, something that actually never comes up in this conversation or debate. A debate that I see two sides of the same neoliberal coin in this debate. You have two writers who I never could really take away anything from their writing or commentary in years, although they were very successful and both clearly backed by lots of capital. I mean, massive grant for Ta-Nehisi Coates to be at Howard University, all this capital going into this abundance movement for Ezra Klein, which really isn't a movement. It's just a repurposing of neoliberalism following all of the damage that it did to the American public, especially in the Rust Belt. And you look at these abundance conferences where they're telling you why we can't have universal health care, and it's just a series of corporations sponsoring it. I mean, they're propping him up. Ta-Nehisi Coates was propped up at the Atlantic. He sucked up to former Israeli prison guard Jeffrey Goldberg to get.
I wanted that to come up so badly. I want him to be asked about that so badly, but he won't do interview. I mean, up to now, he hasn't done any interviews with anybody like us who would be willing to ask him something like that.
No, and so he's not actually speaking to that many people, but he still has this elite status because of those who built him up, because he was safe. He was safe to he was a black writer who was safe to Jewish Zionist power, which controlled the Atlantic, which has been a major base for propagandizing for genocide all those years, and which produced Ezra Klein, who represents Jewish Zionist power. And so I saw two neoliberals with Ezra Klein offering a more like Clintonite, let's sister soldier the left vision, and Ta-Nehisi Coates not pushing a class-based vision or an anti-war vision, but pushing what he always has, which is a warmed-over Afro-pessimist vision, which is that this country cannot fundamentally change because it's rooted in racism and settler colonialism. Therefore, we shouldn't even try, and all we should do is push a kind of racial politics, when neither of them have any critique of Obama. In fact, Ta-Nehisi Coates' principal anger was that Charlie Kirk's base didn't cry when Obama became president as he did. And there's this whole group of people in the country that don't cry and get inspired by Obama. Like, you should cry for what Obama did, that he destroyed one of the last independent, powerful African countries in Libya. But there's no critique there. No critique came out of his time when he was in France trying to follow in the footsteps of James Baldwin about colonialism. Obama is still a hero to him, and Ezra Klein as well. And the sad thing about it all is, after all this whole debate, where did Obama line himself up? He lined himself up with Ezra Klein. He's endorsed the whole abundance movement.
Yeah.
So the fact that the left is debating who's right here, Ta-Nehisi Coates or Ezra Klein, means they're just debating which cultural vision will come out of a neoliberal party.
Okay. I agree with like a lot of what you just said. I would say 80%. But here's what I will push back. I have been a critic. Look it up. I think maybe the best thing I ever wrote was this piece for New York Magazine that was a direct response and criticism of Ta-Nehisi Coates' first white president piece. That was criticizing him on the basis that he was being racially reductive and that he engaged in this sort of Afro-pessimism in part because he had no class analysis. And that you can't simultaneously, to your point, Max, argue that everything is terrible in the world. I mean, America is so racist that it's basically irredeemable. Or I don't know that he would use the word irredeemable, but America is so racist that people are willing to shoot themselves in the foot and not accept policies that will help them because they are framed as helping the undeserving poor, and also insist that Democrats frame every policy they put out as helping the undeserving poor. Like it doesn't help. It doesn't work that way. If you think that America is racist, then I agree. Then you can't insist that everybody's politics be pitched exclusively through a racial lens. Because at the time, remember, he was very critical of Bernie Sanders for not sufficiently racializing his message and getting popular off of a more sort of clean economic populism message. Okay. I ended up meeting Coates accidentally at some point after that. He had read the piece. He was very generous about it. It seemed like he was in a kind of evolution. And my read on Coates is that he has said this, I'm getting this from interviews, not like mind reading, that he has felt sort of insecure about being put in the position of being sort of like the racial voice of America. And since then, I think, especially in the context of his writing about Palestine, has expressed regret about some of the positions that he's taken. Now, I don't want to give him too much credit because he's been a little opaque about what he wishes he hadn't said or the commitments he hadn't made. And I do wonder if when he alludes to these regrets, he's referring to things like denying the racism of Israelis and how common, it's not fringe like Black Israelites in Harlem or whatever, or Hoteps or whatever. It is very much the majoritarian belief in Israel, these supremacist attitudes toward Palestinians. I wonder if that's part of his regret. All that being said, put that to the side for a second, or all that having been caveated, In this interview, I agree with you that he would have been stronger against Ezra Klein had he adopted, one, a more critical approach to neoliberalism, the neoliberalism of Barack Obama, the neoliberalism of Hillary Clinton, the neoliberalism of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and been able to point to that as part of the reason why Democrats lost, as opposed to his sort of tepid pushback that said, well, you don't have to throw various constituency groups under the bus. You could have just not run Joe Biden, who was an unpopular candidate that nobody thought was cogent. Or he also didn't hit the Gaza point very hard. Did you notice that?
After his book, since his book came out, he's just disappeared on that.
Yeah, he was sort of like, he sort of started to tell this anecdote about how hard it was for him to talk about Gaza in the context of this election where Kamala Harris, who some Black people were excited about as a first Black woman, yada yada yada, was the face of this genocide, and how hard it was for him to sort of negotiate that. So he told it in that way, like it was hard for me to pitch my book when so many Black people in my audience didn't want to hear criticisms of Kamala. But he didn't actually put to Ezra Klein the real question, which is, if you wanted to win so badly, and if you're such a pragmatist, what do you make of the polls which show that the number one reason that Biden 2020 voters didn't vote for Kamala in 2024 was Gaza? If you're such a pragmatist, why are you arguing that in the 3 states where abortion rights outperform Democrats, we should run more anti-choice Democrats? If you're such a pragmatist, right? Because the whole grift is painting what a neoliberal agenda, which I think is the agenda that Ezra Klein sincerely believes in. That is his ideological commitment that he won't admit to. He has to dress it up as though, well, these are hard choices that I'm making that I don't want to make. The title of Hillary's book, remember, Hard Choices, but I have to because it's pragmatic. So they'll stick the pragmatic label on things that aren't actually politically expedient while ignoring a whole avenue of politics, class politics, economic populism, anti-war movement, that are actually popular and would be politically advantageous because they don't align with their broader political goals. And that is why, to me, although all that you're saying that's critical of Coates is largely true, I gotta still side with him in the context of this debate, because at least he was open to the idea, or at least alluded to the idea, of exploring these other avenues to victory that I think are frankly much more likely to be successful for the Democratic Party.
Yeah, it's just a very narrow framing of the debate. Like, the debate is framed strictly along culture, or largely along cultural lines, and doesn't address the real fundamental problem with the Democratic Party, which is a fundamental problem with the American economic system. And so there should be no debate about the debate. There should be a critique of the similarities between the participants, and that it's sort of a pseudo debate like the 2008 primary contest in the Democratic Party between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, where it was, should we address sexism or racism? But let's not address what just happened to this country, which is the whole working class got destroyed in the financial crash and the housing crisis and the Iraq war. Those are two very uniting factors that almost came together in 2016 with Bernie Sanders that could have prevented a Trump presidency. Yeah. Trump spoke to it. And so the debate was basically about nothing. And it was a debate that could have taken place in Davos, but it took place in the New York Times. Do
you think that we, on some level, in the absence of a genuinely left candidate, or like a more like a less financially compromised candidate than Roe might end up being, go ahead and throw a lot behind him because he's better than the alternative, lesser two evil style? Should the left be supporting third-party candidates? Do you think that we should be trying to get ourselves together and run a genuine left sort of insurgency within the Democratic Party on the Democratic ticket so they can be in the debate stage and all of that stuff?
I think that we should, first of all, dispense of the idea of the left, because I don't totally understand what it is anymore.
Why do you say that?
There are these general principles of class and war that we should all agree on, and that many people who don't identify as leftists would agree on.
Sure.
And that you're not allowed in the Democratic Party to advance any policies that would materially change the established rules on class and war.
Yeah.
So I see history accelerating from now until the next. The midterms may change things internationally. I mean, one of the reasons Israel's rushing towards war with Iran is they're afraid Trump will begin to lose control after the midterms, and so they have this window. But up until 2028, they're going to be a series of wars. The financial situation in the U.S. is going to continue to worsen, and we will I think we'll still be witnessing genocide in some form or another in Gaza. So all of the issues that exploded into the open in the Democratic primary in 2024 and at the Democratic convention, it's going to intensify. It's also going to be present in the Republican Party because of the trends we discussed with that, like colored Charlie Kirk's final days. The conservative grassroots is moving away from the kind of neoconservative George W. Bush coalition on these issues. And so there are points of unity there. We're going to see the bipartisan duopoly just increasingly discredited by 2028. So there is room, I think, for running primary candidates in congressional races, at least to get a platform. But there also has to be a block of people within the, whatever you want to call it, the left, the progressive base, willing to walk away on these core issues. And I think challenging Zionism it's not a boutique issue. It's such a core issue that goes to the heart of financial and political and military power and the way that it's misappropriated in the United States, that it's worth walking away if it's not answered. And a candidate does not, at the very minimum, block offensive and defensive weapons to Israel to end this catastrophe. That's the demand. And, power concedes nothing without this demand. And it's not what the institutional left actually did in 2024. Do you remember the letter that went out from DSA, JVP, Jewish Voices for Peace, and the what was the coalition called? That I totally forgot what the coalition was
The
called.
Uncommitted?
Uncommitted, yes. And it was a letter to Kamala Harris, and it was basically appealing to her and asking her politely to suspend weapons to Israel, and it spoke to her as Democrats instead of as American voters. And that was totally unacceptable. She basically wiped her ass with the letter. I don't know what she did with it. Rolled a joint with it. When Doug Emhoff was at Soul Cycle, she blazed one with it. I don't know what she, but she really didn't care about that letter because there was no demand and there was no threat. So there needs to be a real threat to walk away completely from the party, not, oh, we want a Palestinian speaker at the convention. That's going to make us happy, because there's going to be a whole other, less politically educated part of the Democratic base that is so traumatized by Trump that they'll be willing to vote for American psycho Gavin Newsom or Jake Tapper's schoolmate Josh Shapiro. But the Republicans already have that. That's the thing. Like, the Democrats don't have those kinds of constituencies that are willing to walk away. The Republicans have that. That's how the Christian right got power in the Republican Party. They only represent like 10 or 12% of the American public, but they're always willing to walk away unless they get some judges who will do their bidding. That's why they were willing to work with Trump, who is accused of, not exactly traditional morality. They don't care. They care about power. So that's what the left needs to do here, is be completely principled and willing to walk away if you don't get what you want. And I know it's a hard thing to do. I mean, it is traumatic to live through this second Trump term.
Yeah, you raise a lot of. First of all, I completely agree word for word with everything you said. I mean, you're very much preaching to the choir, and I think you raise a really important point that the vote blue no matter who pressures are going to be turned up to 300% because of how bad Trump is. As I have been making the case that people need to leave the Democratic Party leading up to 2024, one thing that people have said to me and are still kind of yelling at me in my mentions is like, you said you denied that Trump was going to be worse. And like, look how bad everything is now. And I say, au contraire. My argument is that Trump is going to be bad. Trump is worse. Trump is bad. And therefore, if you want to stop him, you need to listen to our demands if you want us to actually join this party. Like, not me personally. I live in DC and I'm not voting for Dems. But generally speaking, you should be aware of the fact that there are a lot of people for whom genocide is a red line. And you're going to lose if you don't correct on this issue. And it's not, if anything, you should be thanking me for trying to ring the alarm bell, not castigating me for saying the true thing about Kamala Harris. And this is another thing that I will compliment Coates on in this interview. When they're having this conversation about what their roles are, Ta-Nehisi Coates is like, I'm not exactly sure. I don't know exactly what the answers to every question are, but I know that my goal is to tell the truth. My role is to tell the truth, not to fit it into some sort of messaging strategy to help Democrats to win. I understand, that me supporting reparations and wanting Obama to support reparations might not have been politically feasible to him. I understand that FDR maybe had to make compromises that cut Black people out of the New Deal benefits in order to pass it. Like, I understand all of that. But if I were a journalist at the time, I would report on what the truth is, which is that he should have done it. But that's not a good thing to do, that Black people need X, Y, and Z, that, et cetera. And that resonated with me. That resonated with me. And to the extent that the truth is uncomfortable or inconvenient, there was a really easy option for the Democrats, which was to support an arms embargo against Israel, which is the one thing that Kamala Harris was incredibly clear that she would not do.
Yeah, well, it's not an easy option because you could possibly be assassinated, and you certainly will be deprived of large amounts of donations, which is why you can't be supporting a Democrat who depends on large donors. You're never going to get what you want. It's going to be...
Sorry. There's such an opportunity for, like, if RFK Jr. had stuck the landing and not been a Zionist, like that kind of energy of candidate, like, you could just walk through. I mean, to your point, I mean, it's not, you're right. It's not what the left should do, because there is a coalition that's so much bigger than folks who self-identify as the left, who are people who are just generally speaking anti-war, sort of civil libertarian, like, let me live my life. I'm not that hung up by what people are doing in the privacy of their homes. I'm not motivated by the things the religious right are motivated by, but I am motivated by a sort of America first ideology, economic populism, and not wanting to spend American dollars on foreign wars. And it's like so easy. It's so obvious. It's right there. And the fact that none of these Democrats will pick up on, that nobody at all, forget Democrats, seems willing to pick up that mantle is very frustrating. Hey, YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.